The Lord be with you. A reading from the Holy Gospel according to Matthew. Jesus again spoke in reply to the chief priest and the elders of the people, saying, "The kingdom of heaven may be likened to a king who gave a wedding feast for his son. He dispatched his servants to summon the invited guests to the feast, but they refused to come. A second time he sent other servants, saying, 'Tell those invited, behold, I have prepared my banquet. My calves and fattened cattle are killed, and everything is ready. Come to the feast.' Some ignored the invitation and went away, one to his farm, another to his business. The rest laid hold of his servants, mistreated them, and killed them. The king was enraged and sent his troops, destroyed those murderers, and burned their city. Then he said to the servants, 'The feast is ready, but those who were invited were not worthy to come. Go out, therefore, into the main roads, and invite to the feast whomever you find.' The servants went out into the streets and gathered all they found, bad and good alike, and the hall was filled with guests. But when the king came in to meet the guests, he saw a man there not dressed in the wedding garment. The king said to him, 'My friend, how is it that you came in here without a wedding garment?' But he was reduced to silence. Then the king said to his attendants, 'Bind his hands and feet and cast him into the darkness outside, where there will be wailing and grinding of teeth. Many are invited, but few are chosen.'" The Gospel of the Lord. As I was reflecting on today's readings, my memory was instantly drawn back to a number of wedding receptions my family would go to when I was a child. The reason being that these weren't your usual wedding receptions. They were Chinese wedding receptions for family members and friends. Both, of course, wedding receptions, American and Chinese, are joyful and celebratory occasions for family, for friends. They're occasions to cheer on the new couple. But there are also a few cultural differences. One of the major ones is the role that food plays. While the food itself is often an ancillary part of the usual American wedding reception, it plays a central role in the Chinese one. Rather than making your simple choice of beef or chicken or fish, you sit down, and before you know it, the kitchen doors open, and then come course after course after course of seafood and shellfish and fish, beef, pork, vegetables, over and over again. 7 courses, 10 courses, up to 12 or 14 courses, depending on the family. These events were quite joy-filled, and they really captured the sense of the prophet Isaiah in our first reading this morning. This notion that we're to be provided with choice and rich food and drink, that God gives to us out of his abundance and lavishes us with his grace. But rather than simply being lavish, the food that's brought forth at those wedding receptions is a sign of the hospitality, affection, and love of the couple and their families. It's a tool that's used by the bride and the groom to show their gratitude, their appreciation, their joy in that moment. The food itself is more than just something to nourish us after a long day of celebrating, but the central sign of the love and the care that the happy couple has for their guests. The same is true of the banquet feast of heaven. We hear the parable of the king giving a wedding feast this morning. We hear Isaiah talk about the banquet that's prepared for us in the kingdom to come. And it's easy for us to focus on the lavishness. It's easy for us to focus on the over-the-topness. And yes, it's true, the kingdom of heaven is lavish. It is over the top. God's love does flow abundantly and without bound. But it's not lavish for the sake of being lavish. God doesn't like spending without cost simply because he has it all. God's lavishness is there to demonstrate for us his overabundant and boundless love. To remind us that we are worth it. That he's willing to spend it all. To spend it all on us. Sounds too good to pass up, doesn't it? And yet, at the same time, we all know that while God's lavishness is poured upon us, it can be easy for us to question, to doubt, to second guess. Like all other things, we can be distracted from the lavishness of heaven by any number of things on this earth. Our vision, our desire for that life, for the world where Christ's love has no bounds, can be blurred. We can easily forget. What's important to notice in today's gospel is that our forgetfulness of the kingdom isn't always because there's evil in our life. Sometimes it's just the day-to-day stuff of life that distracts us. Notice the first two folks who ignore the Lord's invitation. One went to his farm, the other to his business. Perfectly reasonable things. Things that they were expected to tend to, expected to take care of. And the same is true for us. Our life is filled with any number of responsibilities, with any number of tasks, with any number of chores that we need to execute day in and day out, for ourselves, for our family, for those around us. But if we let those things distract us from the invitation that God gives to us through them, we can cloud our vision of the finish line. It's not that God calls us to ignore those things, but to see them as part of his invitation, to see them as part of our journey to heaven, as of our response to God's invitation to the eternal banquet. Everything we do, every thought, every word, every action, all of it has the ability to draw us closer to the kingdom of heaven. But that yes, that initial RSVP, will only get us so far. Not only is the king frustrated by those who ignore his invitation, but then when those invited do come, he's outraged once again. Why is it that you're not wearing a wedding garment? You can say this man probably had a number of good excuses. Well, you just told me to come here, so I showed up. But we know what the feast is about. We know what the feast entails. We know what is required of us for it. Our initial yes needs to be followed up each and every day with supplementary yeses. The choice to respond to God's invitation to the kingdom of heaven, to journey to the banquet, is not one we make once. It's also one we make time and time and time again. Every morning we wake up. It's a commitment that we renew each day as Christians in our desire to live lives of charity and kindness and goodness and justice and peace. And so as we gather around this table, as we prepare to celebrate the Lord's banquet, to share just a bit in the eternal feast that awaits us in heaven, we give thanks for the invitation. We give thanks to our God for his generosity, his boundless love. But we're also mindful of those things that might be distracting us from his glory. Those day-to-day anxieties, those day-to-day worries, those day-to-day fears. And we ask God to take those from us. We offer them to God here, so that we might place even greater trust in his love, even greater trust in his invitation. If we are willing to keep our minds fixed on this gift, and to allow this gift to shape and form every word, every thought, every action of our life, then we will truly and surely share in the banquet of God's glory in the life to come.